everyone, and welcome to this week's watercolor project here on Patreon. And I thought what I would do for the next little while anyway is to go back to the Q&A that I printed out when you guys asked all those wonderful questions and pick one of them and cover it for a watercolor lesson or project. And the one we're going to do today was suggested by Kate Jacobs, and she said she wanted to know how to paint transparent subjects such as glass or ice. And the simplest answer to that is we paint it just like we paint everything else. We paint what we see, right? We paint the color and the shapes that we see. And we try to forget that we're painting glass, that we're painting something transparent, because if we start to think about it too much, our brains are going to get us all confused, and we're going to think, how do we paint the water in the transparent? How do we, paint something see-through? It's solid. So our brains will trick us. So what we have to do is we have to go back to our basic premise, and that we forget what our brain's telling us, and we just look at what our eye is telling us. We forget what we're painting. We forget that it's a glass or a piece of ice or a flower or a bird. And we only look at the colors and the shapes and the textures, okay? So the very best thing you could do is to paint from life. Unfortunately, we can't, here on Patreon, we can't all paint the same thing from life. So a reference image is sort of the way we have to go. So I shared this reference image on Patreon, and you are welcome to print it out. This is not something that you would use for a work that you would sell. It's just for practice, okay? Because we don't own this image. But there are four glasses to choose from that you can totally see. The one in the back here you can't really see, so I wouldn't do that one. So you've got four to choose from. And personally, I think this one right here on the right hand side is a great place to start, because it's the simplest and it gives us a little color. This one's a little trickier because it's very see-through, so we'd have to be really good with our washes. This one's got pretty simple, but it's got some detail work, which you'll be able to do for sure, but just maybe not for your first one. And this one also has some detail, which you could actually ignore if you wanted to. But quite honestly, all it is little lines. It looks tricky, but it really isn't. So we're going to do this one, or I'm going to do this one. And I would suggest that you practice it a few times and then practice each of them to get better at it. And then maybe you'd want to do the whole composition or create a still life of your own of small glass bottles with flowers in them, which is a simple thing to do at home. And you're going to learn the most from working from life, because when we're working, let's say we're going to paint this jar with a paintbrush in it or something, and I set it out here, in front of me. I'm seeing a three-dimensional object, so I'm really noticing all the things that are around the vase are being shown through the vase, right? And so it makes it a little trickier for us unless we isolate it on a white background or something. This is a great place to start though, so I suggest that we start here. So there's a few things that I want to point out about this. So if we're looking at this one, we're going to ignore the flower at first. Okay, we're going to ignore the flower. We're just going to paint the vase, all right? What I want to notice is that I've got a lot of white paper here, or really, really pale, like blue-green. And what I'm seeing is a very soft outline of the bottle, okay? I'm seeing the outline of the bottle. I'm seeing the other side of the outline of the bottle. So like the bottom is round and you see the other side of it down here, like reflected. I see the water line in the bottle, which is just an ellipse of color, right? I see this line here, which is reflected from the other side. All right, so I'm seeing lines. Now I also see this blue bottle tucked in behind it, and we're going to ignore that. We're going to pretend like that's not there, and basically it would just be like it is over here. It would just be this green line, all right? So when we do want to add the flower, what we'll notice is that the flower looks very clear and sharp above, and then it starts to get a little bit blurry underneath. a little bit blurry, and then it's going to have a jag where the water breaks it. It's an illusion, and then it's going to continue down. All right, so the only way to know this is to look at it and to observe how it happens right in front of you. So either in a photograph or in a still life that you create yourself. So again, we're just going to be painting what we see. So I'm going to move my reference image over, and what I did is I just made a simple line drawing on a piece of 4x6 watercolor paper. This is a sort of a hot press paper. You can use hot press or cold press, whatever you like best. All right, I'm going to wake my paints up a little bit. Today I am using watercolors by Arts by MCM by Christina Mazzoni. Mostly I picked them because she has this beautiful color that's very similar to the blue of the bottle. So I can mix two of them together and create that color. Okay, so I have this simple line drawing, and I've drawn it fairly, I don't want to go too dark because I don't want to see it, but I tried to draw it dark enough so you could see it, okay? And I'm going to start by mixing up the color of my bottle. So I've got a little palette here. And, oops. I'm going to grab some blue-green that reminds me a little bit of this one. So I'm just mixing up a color that to me represents the blue-green glass. So some of it's a little greener, some of it's a little bluer. Whatever bottle you choose, you're going to mix up a color that's kind of like the one you see. It doesn't have to be exact, obviously, but it's good practice, right? Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to put a little water glaze down on my bottle because I want these edges to be really soft. Right? I don't want to have hard lines at all. So, and you'll notice that the blue-green sort of comes in a little bit from the side too. So I'm going to start, and our bottles will usually be broken into sections, you know, just by their nature, like the water line, the neck, you know, things like that. So I'm just going to start at the top, and I'm not going to paint the upper rim. Okay, I'm going to put water right underneath it. Too much water. And I'm going to paint this little section right here. And I'm going to take it a little bit at a time. Now, if I were probably painting this on my own, I might do the whole thing at once. But it's okay to take our time with it. And then I'm going to take my paint, and I'm just basically going to draw a line on this edge. And I'm going to draw a line on this edge. I'm just kind of dropping it in along that edge. All right? And then I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to dry it off. And I'm going to wick my dryish brush through that wet paint to lift up the extra. Okay, so do you see how now I only have this hint of the blue-green paint on the edges, all right? And then I've wicked up the center part, so it's very subtle and faint. All right, I have very soft edges. If I were to just put paint down on the paper, I would have a hard line and I would have to soften it, all right? That's another way to go about this. So let's try that. Oh, you know what I forgot? Sorry, guys. I want to draw a water line, okay? So it's going to be sort of curved, just like you see it in the image. Okay? All right. So I'm gonna do this without putting water down first, so you can see the difference. So I'm putting down the paint, okay? And then immediately I have to rinse my brush, sort of dry it off, and then I soften that edge. Okay, and I notice that the green comes all the way down, but it gets softer, and I can always drop in a little bit more if I need to. Okay, so that's how you would draw the straight line and then soften the edge. So you have a choice. I often prefer to put a water glaze because I just feel like I get better results. So I'm going to do that down here at the bottom, and I'm going to put a water glaze in. This is very student grade paper, so I'm not really that familiar with it. I probably should have used a better paper, but okay, see how I'm putting my water glaze down? This way I am guaranteed a soft edge, and that's what I really want. Okay, I've got my water glaze. I don't want it too wet, so I'm sort of mopping it up a little bit because I don't want any puddles. And then I'm going to pick up my color, and I'm looking at my reference image, and I notice that it starts a little bit. Oh, I totally messed that up. Sorry. My brain is not very good today. Okay, let's start down here. Pulling my paint down this edge. It comes all the way down to the bottom, and I'm noticing where it's darker, where it's lighter. Okay, and then it comes all the way down, and then a little bit across. So once that's down, then I can take my clean damp brush and soften those edges and make sure that I'm kind of wicking up anything that's extra. I don't want it to be hard lines at all. All right, so that's very soft. Okay, very, very soft. I'm very happy with that. Now I'm going to go up here and do this part. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a water glaze down. Now, if you are quick and you are comfortable, by all means, do it in one pass. You could put a water glaze over the whole bottle and do the edges and then come back and do the inner parts after that dries. So this is just to make it easier for you. When you're first starting, sometimes putting a water glaze down feels tricky, and it just, by the time you put it down and you feel like it's good, it's already starting to dry, and you know, it just gets a little tricky sometimes. So there's nothing wrong with breaking it down. Okay, so again, I notice that it doesn't start all the way at the top, so I'm just going to drop it in where I see it. Okay, and on this side, it does start all the way at the top. Okay, rinse my brush. And just make sure my edges are nice and soft. Sometimes with the water glaze, like I said, this paper is not great, so I might have to fuss with it a little bit. But if you're using good paper, that paint should just flow right out and you shouldn't have to do too much work. All right, so that is my first layer here. And then I'm gonna take some of my paint and I'm gonna paint the top, all right? And if you look at it, you see the paint at the corners. And at the top. Okay? So this part here is left clear, and you've got the corners and the top. All right, and then I've got a little bit of a line here, so I'm just going to pull that across. Just a little bit. If it's too dark, you just rinse your brush, dry it off, and just soften. All right, so now we need to let this completely dry. I got blue on my paper. We need to let this completely dry because then we want to erase our pencil lines, and then we'll put some finishing touches on our bottle. Okay, so my painting is now dry, and I've got a kneaded eraser here. And it's kind of dirty, so I'm just kneading it a little bit. And I want to try to erase the pencil lines if possible. You know, depending on the colors that you use, graphite will come up under watercolor if you've painted over it. There are some colors, however, that stain, and therefore they won't come up, but this came up very nicely. All right, so now I have the simplest form of my vase with water in it, right? And it looks very convincing. I mean, we can tell that it's a clear glass bottle, but there are some things we need to do to improve it. So again, I'm going to go back to my paint color, and I'm going to look at my reference image, and I'm going to say, okay, I know that this needs to be darker here, that the corners and bottom need to be darker, that this line needs to be more distinct, and that I've got a little bit more right up here. So I'm going to do that. And this time, I'm not going to put a water glaze down, but I'm simply going to follow my reference and draw in what I see with my paint. And then I'm going to use a clean damp brush to just soften it, so I don't have anything too hard. I want it distinct, but I don't want it to be really hard. Now there's also color on the inside here, so I want to make sure that I add that. So again, what I'm doing, all I'm doing, is I'm painting what I see, okay? It's the same rule that we use for everything else when we're doing something representational. We're painting what we see and not what we know. So I see a little bit more right here. I'm always looking at my reference and making sure that I'm following it the best I can if I'm trying to make a representation of it. Now, I've got the same down here, okay? So I'm going to draw what I see with my paintbrush. There's a lot down here at the bottom. Okay, rinse my brush, dry it off, and then I'm going to soften that with just a clean damp brush. Okay, and then the same thing on this side. I see it a little bit darker down here, but not all the way on the edge, just down here. And then again, that line. I'm painting what I see. And really, you know, when I'm doing this kind of work, I consider it drawing. I feel like I'm drawing with my paintbrush. All right. So now I'm starting to get an even more effective look here. So I look at the top of my glass vase, and it's also very distinct on this side. At the top, the line is darker, so I'm adding that in. And then I'm going to use a clean damp brush just to lightly soften that edge. And it just comes a little bit beyond that. Okay, and then I see a little bit more at the corners up here. Okay, and I think that's it. I think that's it. I can see that my graphite did not come off over on this side. I'm going to work at that again when it's dry, because that would be, that would really make a difference, because this hard line of graphite here is kind of affecting the illusion of that glass being lighter on that side. All right, so now our glass is done. All right, If you want to anchor it to a table, you're going to have to look at your shadow, and you're going to have to see, where your shadow is. And here it looks like the shadow is coming straight down on these images. So I could just take some clear water, and I could paint some clear water underneath my bottle. Okay, and if you ever notice the shadow of glass, all right, it's going to have a little bit of a lighter area, all right? So I'm going to use a gray, and I'm going to drop it in. All right, and then it's going to have a tiny bit of the color that's being reflected. Tiny bit of the glass color. Now, here's what I have to say about this. There is no hard and fast rule to shadows with glass. So just like I've told you with other things, it's a case-by-case basis, all right? I want to make sure that I'm looking at the shadow that's in front of me or that's in my image. And unfortunately, on this image, you can't really see the shadow. So I'm going by sort of what I can see at the other ones. Okay. And I always want to soften the outer edges of shadows. Okay. So that's that. Now, you don't have to put a shadow, but I kind of like it. So if I wanted to put a flower in, all right, I would probably start with the stem, and I would find the green that I want to use. Just getting some green in my palette here. Okay. Maybe a little bit of yellow in it. Okay, so I want to look at this image, all right, or my still life that I've created at home, but right now I'm using a reference image. And I see that the stem sort of comes up this way, and it hits this side. It hits this side. It's going to go right to that edge. Okay. It's going to skip a little bit, all right, because you've got this edge, and then it's going to come on the inside. And then it's going to tilt down a little bit, and then it's going to break the water, and it's going to come all the way to here, and then it's going to skip over, and it's going to be magnified. On that side, okay? Now, once I have it in there, remember I said that I want to sort of soften and blur the stem when it's inside the glass, and especially down here. So I'm just sort of softening it down here. Okay? It's going to make it look more real if you soften what's inside, and then you can keep this up here as sharp as it is. All right, and it just sort of comes through here, but not too much. All right, once I have that, I can add more to the stem if I need to. If there's darker areas on it or texture or anything like that, I can always add that later. I see that it's a little bit darker down here, and then a little bit more down here, but once it's wet, I can just sort of drop things in and it'll stay fuzzy on the edges. Okay, then I can go up and I can paint my flower. And I think I'm just going to keep it really simple. Keeping it simple. The inside is nice and dark. So we just want to make sure that it follows that law. We can just keep it really simple, a simple flower. Okay, that's not really our focus here. But I do want to add the little leaves. Okay, very simple. And just because I can't stop fussing. It's typical, right? Okay, just for fun. Okay, so now we have a glass vase that we can see through with a flower in it, all right? And my advice is to take your time and really study what you're doing. Now that I've finished, I can go back here and I can see that I need more of this color right here where that water break is. And every time I do that, I've got to go back and I have to soften that. Okay. All right, so I hope this made sense. The other thing, you know, this glass is pretty clear, and the water in the glass is pretty clear, but what you could do, I do see a little bit more of a blue hint in that water, so I could just take a very, very transparent wash, and I could add a little bit of color to the bottom part of the vase if I wanted to. All right, just to give it a little bit more body down here. It really didn't need it, and I don't see it too much in the reference image, but you can always do that. You can always put a little bit more color where the water is. Just a tiny bit though, all right? Unless you have dirty water, but I don't think you'd paint dirty water, so. All right, I hope this was helpful. I hope it made sense. We'll do something else like this sometime, but this is just an introductory to it. And the main thing I want you to do is practice these simple things first before you start to get complicated with them, all right? Practice them. Look at pictures of vases with flowers in them sitting on a table and look at the shadows. Look at how they look, all right? Excuse me. Create some still lifes in your house and watch how the light comes through them. Watch the shadows that they create. Look at the different shapes and colors that you see, all right? Notice how the stem changes as it goes into the glass and then goes into the water. It's going to change both times, all right? Stick with simple things first. As you master that and you start to understand it, then you can become more complicated. So that's why I would start with this one first with the single stem, and then maybe go to this one with 2 stems, and then maybe this one with 3 stems, okay? And then when you really feel comfortable, you could go to this one that has the lost edges. So in other words, you're just not going to put edges there. You're going to put them only where you see them, okay? And then you're going to erase, all right? All right, everybody, I hope this was helpful. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you Friday with a dandelion lesson. Take care, and thank you so much to my new patrons. We keep growing, everybody. So I know a lot of that is because you all talk about it with your friends, and you give testimonials to what we do here, and that's so helpful, and I really appreciate it because the right people are finding their way here. All right? Thank you so much. Take care.